crime, conspiracy, murder, cults, your mom. Just kidding, we're not talking about your mom. But we are talking about murder today. Specifically, serial killers. Specifically, the Piggy Palace killer, the pig farmer killer, the butcher. We're talking about Robert Pickton. For those of you who don't know who Robert Pickton is, in 2001, Robert Pickton was charged for murdering 26 women, dismembering them, and feeding them to his pigs on his pig farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. Although Pickton claimed to have killed 49 women between the years 1983 and 2002. And this quickly became the largest serial killer investigation in Canadian history. And this one hits really close to home, literally, because I lived 30 minutes away from where this took place, and I was alive. We're not going to talk about how old I am, but I remember all of this happening. And I remember vividly how this investigation absolutely shook the city and neighboring cities to their core. It was terrifying to know somebody so close to home was committing these atrocities against mothers, daughters, sisters, aunties, and it struck fear in a lot of people for a really long time because this was an extremely long, drawn-out investigation. But this also was my weird awakening into not liking true crime, but being interested in true crime. When I was a little tyke and hearing about the story, I just wanted to catch them all like Pokemon and throw them into Satan's fire or jail. So that's actually why I ended up taking criminology in university, because I really wanted to, catch criminals. And alas, I dropped out and became a hairdresser instead, and then randomly became a YouTuber. And I think we've come full circle because now I'm talking about it. So I'm making the best of both worlds, but I digress. Let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down a dirt road, slam on the brakes, deep dive through the windshield into this pig pen of a story. Let's get to it. So, Robert William Pickton was born on October 24th, 1949, in British Columbia, Canada, and a middle child of 3. I've never not wanted to be a middle child more in my life. But anyway, he was born to Leonard and Louise Pickton, and he was raised on his family-owned pig farm in Port Coquitlam. His father was a farmer, obviously, and when he was younger, he met his 16-year younger wife in a coffee shop in Port Coquitlam. Oh, that's so sweet. They probably touched hands when she passed him a muffin or something, and they looked into each other's eyes and saw how beautiful one another were, and then they fell in love. Isn't that such a nice little meet cute story? Isn't it? Well, no, because they were both pieces of rotten shit. Just like their son. Like mother, father, and son. All these people are POSs, all right? Robert Pickton's parents would make even Satan raise an eyebrow or two, if you know what I'm saying. So let's talk about Robert's mommy, Louise Pickton, first. So Louise was, let's just say, a kooky lady, and I don't think there's really any pictures of her on the internet. If there are, we'll put them up, but if not, I have a description for you. By the time she was a mid to older adult, and not even older adult, she was in her 30s, all of her teeth had rotted out of her mouth because she just didn't take care of herself. She didn't brush her teeth, she didn't go to the dentist, and it's not because she wasn't well off. These people had money. They were just disgusting. The way I describe this family, it will be so much like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if you guys have ever seen that movie, and that family, how just gross and visceral and terrible they are. It is that, verbatim. It's like they were trying to be these people. And not only were her teeth rotting out of her face in her late 30s to mid 40s, but also all of her hair fell out, which it's fine. It's fine if your hair falls out. It doesn't really matter. But the fact that she's just a terrible human being, it just makes me think she looked like that old decrepit ghoul from the movie The Taking of Deborah Logan. Terrifying. But to make up for the lack of hair on her head, she had a sick goatee, let me tell you. And a sweet mustache, according to people that she knew. So basically, just picture this. And to boot, her choice of attire, according to her friends, okay, would be a house dress over top of very loose jeans and the largest gumboots possible. So she was just waddling around the farm. She looked like a little gremlin, man. I don't know. I think it's kind of funny. But she's a terrible person, and we'll get to that. And she also was extremely short. Again, not that that matters. I'm just describing her to give you a picture. And there's not much known about Leonard Pickton Pickton and his appearance and how he was, because he was a pretty standoffish kind of father, you know, one that you want approval from, but you can't get, and he just beats the shit out of you even every time you try to talk to him. That was Leonard Pickton. That's basically all the description we have. But both of Robert's siblings inherited Louise's stunning good looks, but Robert was said to have inherited his dad's rat face. And you know what I mean, because look at this guy. Piece of shit, rat-faced fuck. So it wasn't exactly the Hemsworth family, but I digress. So this good-looking farm family not only housed chickens, ducks, and dogs, but their main animal on the farm was, can you guess it? That's right, pigs. And when I say housed, I don't mean they kept them in separate farms or sheds. I mean they physically had these animals walking through their house, shitting and peeing in their house, and they would never clean it up. They would just wear their boots in the house. So this is just the most disgusting house you've ever stepped foot in. This is basically the worst case in hoarders history because what they were hoarding was shit, which makes sense in hindsight because the entire family had shit personalities. Am I right? Yeah. So the kids had to slop 200 pigs twice a day. And if you don't know what slopping is, that's basically just feeding the pigs slop. And by doing that, the stench and slop and just pig manure, everything would just stick to these kids. And they'd be coming home from school and doing this and going back to school. So the kids were known to just smell like shit, which, I mean, I just kind of feel bad. Like they had to work on a farm. I live in a farm town, so that's actually very common. But usually kids shower. But little Robert Pickton was scared of water, so he never showered. Just red flag. And their father, Leonard, would also smell like pig shit all the time, and he would earn the name Piggy from the locals. But he didn't seem to care. He actually liked it. It's like when you insult somebody nicely, but then they're just too dumb to understand, like,
whew, someone went with their natural musk today, hey, Leonard?
And Leonard's just like,
oh yeah, thank you so much. I can smell you from 10 feet away, Leonard. Wow, that's crazy. Must be really strong. Leonard, you smell like shit.
So the Picktons in general lived somewhat of an isolated life on the farm, and the children especially, spending most of their time with the pigs and with each other. The eldest daughter, Linda, did have a bit of a social life, and she was out of the house more than the boys, but the boys mostly when they were young just hung out with each other and with the pigs. Red flag. Number 2, 3, I don't know. I'm not gonna keep track. And Linda was not surprisingly the only one in the family that turned out somewhat normal, because her parents actually let her go out and hang out with friends and bought her new clothes, new dresses. She was like the princess of the family, kind of. I mean, a princess of a filthy fucking family, but the boys basically spent their entire childhoods in the slop. And this was partially because they actually wanted to be at home with each other, but especially Robert, because Robert, red flag number, who the fuck knows, was obsessed with his mommy. Oh no. We know serial killers that are obsessed with their mommies. Uh-oh. Ed Gein, Ed Kemper. Oh, well, Ed's. I guess this is Robert. I don't know. Either way, I'm seeing patterns. They're gonna keep happening. Robert, like many other serial killers, had a very unhealthy attachment to his mother, Louise. And the only relationship he shared with his father, like I said before, when he even bothered to acknowledge Robert's existence, was to beat the shit out of him and be verbally abusive as well. And Robert was, let's just say, not the sharpest tool in the shed. He was known for only taking special ed classes when he was in school, and he would drop out when he was a freshman in high school. So between always smelling like manure, being antisocial, loving his mommy a little bit too much, and not being the brightest monkey in the barrel, Robert Pickton got picked on quite a bit, believe it or not. Which I don't condone bullying, but now that I know that this man literally is the worst human being alive, I don't really give a shit. And one of the ways he would cope with being bullied would be to go home and hide in a fresh hog carcass until he felt better. So it's like the Revenant, except he didn't do it to live. He did it to... I don't know. I don't know. Guys, I feel like I look like a freaking dweeb with my glasses, but I literally can't see if I'm in focus or not, and I cannot see the document that I wrote, so I gotta go back to the glasses, and sorry. Sexy secretary criminal Chris, coming at you. Here we go. Now, at 12 years old, Robert would have an important moment that happened in his life that he would go on to tell anybody that would listen as he became an adult. Robert, at 12 years old, would go to a livestock auction with $35 of his own money that he saved up. And for those of you who don't know, livestock auctions are where you buy animals, often something to either have on your farm or just to butcher. Anyway, he would go to that livestock auction and he would spend his $35 on an adorable little calf to raise. Oh, like a little cow, so cute, I love it. And he would go on to raise this calf for a few weeks and he was loving it, he was having a good time, and then one day, he would come home from school and he would look for his calf and he would say,
Dad, where's my calf? I can't find it. Do you know where I put my calf?
and his father would say,
Oh, son, have you looked in the barn?
and little Robert would say,
No, Father, but I will. Thank you for letting me know.
So he walked over to the farm and he looked for his little cow companion, and when he opened the doors to the barn, he gazed upon his spotted friend hanging from his feet from the ceiling with his throat cut, bleeding into a bucket on the ground. And as he started to realize that his calf compadre had been butchered beyond belief, he heard a little chuckle from behind him, and it was his father who was just playing a fun little prank on little Ricky. Like, can you imagine your father doing that? So as you could see, you can really start to smell the cereal pot of stew brewing. No, boiling, I think. Like, can you imagine your dad calling you downstairs to prank you, and he's just hiding behind the corner, and he's about to scare you when you come down, and he's like, ah! Also, taxidermied the cat on the kitchen counter. Am I right? No? Too far? Fair. Anyway, I do feel bad. I feel bad. That's f***ed up. That's f***ed up to witness as a kid. I mean, that's probably not going to make or break you as a serial killer necessarily, but I can't imagine experiencing that as a child. Like, there are plenty of people that are raised in less than ideal situations, and even on farms. Like, if you live on a farm, you know that a lot of the pets and stuff have to get butchered and stuff. And these people grow up being normal people and don't end up, butchering almost 50 women. So I'm not going to give him any leeway, if you will. So when Robert was 14, he and his family would move to a different pig farm in Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada, which was just about 20 minutes away from Port Coquitlam. And Linda, Robert's older sister, would take this opportunity to get the fuck out of town, man. She went to Vancouver to stay with friends and relatives, and she was like, bye bitches, y'all are fucking disgusting and I'm peacing out this bit. Bye. 10 points for Linda. We love Linda, boss ass bitch. She got out of there at the right time, let me tell you what. Because this would be the farm where all of the heinous crimes and atrocities would take place in the years to come. And this place literally looked like a horror movie set. It's like the biggest horror movie trope location you've ever seen. Like, this is a farm you would see when you're walking by and be like,
Somebody definitely got murdered in that farm, I tell you what. Did you guys hear that scream?
And this land was literally littered with quicksand spots that you could very much potentially die in if you stepped in. And to top it off, there was a creepy, smelly lagoon at the back of the property. Really, all that was missing was a creepy guy in overalls that preyed on helpless women, am I right? Oh wait, that's this guy! Again, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, man, that's all I could think of. So this farm had over 700 pigs on it. 700 pigs. And a couple hundred chickens stuffed into a couple different sheds and barns. And Willie, aka Robert, and Dave, just about to be out of high school, were slopping the pigs 3 times a day at this point. So they slop in the morning, they'd slop at lunchtime from school, and they'd slop at night, and they'd slop at night. That's hard to say. All while never taking a shower. Well, Dave sometimes took a shower, but Robert literally never took a shower. He would have to be forced to take it, and no one was really doing that. So this guy was a piece of shit that smelled like shit. It's just shit. And just like at the other farm and house that they had, they would continue to let animals come in and out of their house as well, pissing and shitting and eating whatever they could find. And at 15, Robert would get kicked out of high school for showing his nudie magazines that he brought, like the ones where like you hold it up and like the girl's wearing a dress, but then it drops down and then it shows her bosoms. He got kicked out of school for that. I feel like kids don't get kicked out of school. I feel like that's not that bad. I mean, again, he's a piece of shit, but I don't think that's that bad. But anyway, his mother was very happy because she got to spend more time with her son and she had a full-time employee on the farm now. Now, Dave, Robert's brother, on the other hand, was at this point getting very popular amongst his peers. He had more of a social group, he dated girls, he showered, but he was not an innocent guy, to say the least. And his rap sheet started when he was only 16 years old. In 1967, at the age of 16, Dave was driving his truck and he would hit a boy walking home from school. It was a 14-year-old boy named Tim Barrett. And after hitting him, he would severely injure Tim Barrett. And Tim was lying on the ground, but Dave would hop back in his truck and drive straight home and not call for any help. And after he drove straight home, he told his parents what had happened. And what did they do? They called the cops, right? They did the right thing, right? They called the cops and said, oh my goodness, my kid hit another kid and it's just terrible and we need to figure this out. No, Leonard, Dave's father, went to his truck, cleaned off all the blood, and began to fix it as to cover up the crime. And Luis went Mach 5 down the dirt road to where Tim Barrett was and proceeded to roll him off the road while he's barely conscious, dump him off into an embankment that was slightly flooded, and hope that no one would find him and that he would just die. So yeah, this is kind of where I'm saying that his parents were pieces of shit. And that is precisely what would happen when Tim was found a few days later. The truck hitting him is not what caused his death. He died by drowning. So Louise Pickton actually killed this kid. And the only reason why we know that is because Louise later on in life told one of her friends this is what happened. So this is just a family full of psychopaths, a family full of just filthy mongrels. And despite being fairly well off with their farm business and with their meat locker business, where they would hold processed meat for people to come and pick up to consume later on, or hold meat that they butchered for people, this family would still go to local dumpsters and just hoard anything they could find and eat anything they could find. These people were rich. Like, they were well off into millionaires at this point, but they were just fucking filthy. I don't know how else to say it. So if you were to go onto this property, there would just be garbage everywhere and the house would just smell terrible. So by the early 70s, the Pickton brothers were starting to establish their career paths on the farm. And these are the careers that they would continue to have for the rest of their lives, or until somebody went to jail. Dave was working in demolishing and construction, and Robert was working as an apprentice butcher. Red flag. And it was also at this time that Robert would gain the hobby of writing to pen pals. That's fun. I used to write to pen pals. That was very fun. I loved doing that. And his favorite woman to write to was Connie Anderson, who lived in Michigan, USA. And when Robert was 24, he would take a road trip for the first time out of the country and go to Michigan to meet Connie IRL, NGLLO XOXO, Gossip Girl. Sorry. And shortly after he got down there, they actually got engaged, but it did not last long at all because Robert needed to go back to the farm in Canada and Connie had a job where she couldn't leave in Michigan. And I'm just gonna say this, Connie, you dodged a bullet, all right? Or should I say a psychotic, mass murdering, corpse feeding human butcher? Am I right? Anyway, so Robert would inevitably go back home and continue working on the farm and continue working as a butcher. And finally, in 1978, Leonard Pickton, Robert's father, would pass away at the age of 91. And the year after, his mother, Louise Pickton, would pass away as well at the age of 67 with the cause of cancer. And you know what that means when both the parents are dead? Bring out the will! I don't care, they're pieces of shit. So at this time, the farm and the property, despite it being absolutely disgusting and full of garbage, was worth a whopping $1 million in 1979. And each child would individually get $90,000. And Robert's siblings would get the money right away, but Robert would have to wait until he was 40 years old to receive that $90,000, which was really interesting. But Robert, being his mommy's favorite, would receive an extra $20,000 up front immediately. And we don't really know why that is, but we're assuming that she just wanted him to remain working on the farm and she was his favorite, so she gave him a little extra cash. I don't really know. So this is when Robert and Dave would start their junkyard on the Pickton property. They would basically start going around and buying used cars and scrap metal to put on the farm. And his meat business was also starting to grow in the community as well. For the business, he would go to animal auctions, buy animals, take them back to the farm, and butcher them for the locals. Whether it was cows, goats, pigs, llamas, and even emus. I don't know who the fuck is eating emus up here. I've never seen one in my life, but you're fucked. I mean, I don't really care about the emus. They're like giant dinosaurs and I'm terrified of birds, so fuck 'em. But what his customers didn't know is that Robert would save a lot of money by picking out animals that often were like sickly and diseased and were filled with sores and pus, which is so disgusting. But he's a business savvy man. I gotta give him that. And Robert's method to butchering these animals would be either to cut their throat or shoot them in the head with the nail gun to end their life. And then he would punch a hole through their ankles and string them up upside down to bleed them out into a bucket. And after that, he would proceed to dismember the animal and butcher it. And this would be the almost identical process carried out by Robert Pickton to murder the dozens of women in this slaughterhouse as well in the years to come. And body parts of these women would accompany animal parts as well, as Robert would bury them in 40-foot holes around the entire property. Not only was he about to murder dozens of women in the near future, but he would also use this property for other criminal activity as well, including running a chop shop for the Hells Angels. And for those of you who don't know, the Hells Angels are essentially a very large criminal biker gang that is very prevalent to this day. I actually know people who have ended up in the Hells Angels, and these crimes span anywhere from money laundering, car theft, murder, etc. to get into this gang. So just not great people to associate yourself with, except if you're a serial killer. Sounds about right. So in 1980, Robert Pickton would start taking the excess animal parts to a rendering plant in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is about 20 minutes away from Coquitlam. And it was called West Coast Reduction. Essentially, a rendering plant is where you take animal parts that are not fit for human consumption and they ground them down into a paste of sorts that they can use in cosmetics, soap, paint, etc. And I bet you can guess where this is going. Remember when I said he butchered women and got rid of them in the same way he got rid of the animal parts? Yeah. So there was literally human remains being dropped off at this rendering plant and unknowingly processed by the people at the rendering plant and shipped out around BC and all of Canada. And whatever scraps he did not take to the rendering plant, he fed to his pigs. And it just makes me sick to my stomach too. I can't even imagine the amount of disrespect, disdain, and just disregard for human life. Like I said in the beginning, these are mothers, these are daughters, these are sisters, and he's just disposing of them like animal scraps. Like I truly hope this man is just rotting away in jail with the never-ending existential dread and fear of the fact that he is going to be burning in an eternal flame for the rest of his godforsaken death. You know, I have the utmost sympathy for the victims and their families, and I just always want to reiterate that. Anyway, so after Robert would drop off the scraps at the rendering plant, he would be only a block away from his future hunting ground, which was East Hastings, Vancouver, which was a strip in which homeless and prostitutes were roaming in the hundreds. It was also known as the prostitute stroll, and still is to this day. Most of you won't know this, but I know this very intimately because I've spent a lot of time in Vancouver. It's really not that far from me, and I also on a yearly basis go down there to give out food and clothes to the homeless there. But this street is in horrible condition. It is extremely unfortunate, and I feel bad for a lot of these people. I know, you know, a lot of people can't control what happens in their life, and a lot of people can, but it's just extremely sad going to this street. I know a lot of people that have visited here and they see East Hastings, and it's like The Walking Dead, to be honest. So this strip was essentially a serial killer's playground, especially at this time. And the police, quite frankly, did not give a flying fuck what happened to any of these people on East Hastings. So it was basically a free-for-all. And we do know that another serial killer working around the exact same time, Gary Ridgway, was said to have picked up at least a few victims on East Hastings. And we know that because when the police caught him, they would find a map in his truck with the exact location circled. And another serial killer that was active at the time, Gilbert Jordan, was working in this area and was said to have murdered numerous female prostitutes, specifically Indigenous women, which was and still is a massive problem in British Columbia specifically. Not only to prostitutes, but just in regards to Indigenous women in general. We have what's called the Highway of Tears in British Columbia, and over 40 Indigenous women have gone missing and have been murdered on that highway, and there has been little to investigate it, and it's just heartbreaking. Like I really hope that I can bring some sort of light to that. Like it's just, I feel so bad for the families of these women and for the victims themselves. But this was very common in that time and in this location, and also it was common throughout the states as well, especially in California with African American prostitutes as well. The police just didn't care. And that's what's so heartbreaking about the story. And that's how Robert Pickton was able to murder for so many years, because the judicial system was so flawed and people weren't considered as people if they did a certain job, which is absolutely bullshit. And I truly hope that anybody that has family that has experienced this gets justice one day. So in saying that, let's continue. So the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Canadian FBI, if you will, these guys, I know, we never updated the uniform or the transportation. I don't get it either. Anyway, the RCMP did try to help the Vancouver Police Department in the early 90s during this investigation, starting Project Eclipse with a team of profilers in Vancouver. But it ended up not really going anywhere because the Vancouver Police Department didn't know at all what to do with their findings, because they're idiots. I don't want to say that about all of them. This is very, like, when I talk about the Vancouver Police Department in a whole, like, they neglected and they were not good in this case, but that comes down to the higher-ups. Like, I'm sure that there were so many wonderful police officers that really wanted to make a difference in the situation, but they can't do anything if the higher-ups don't provide funding and don't assign them to these cases. So when I talk about the Vancouver Police Department being neglectful, I'm talking about a few certain people that were prideful, ignorant, spiteful, and neglectful. And it was even more frustrating because Kim Rossmo, a world-renowned profiler, worked within the Vancouver Police Department. But everyone around him in the department despised him and refused to work with him just because he was a profiler and a higher-up, and he worked his way up the ranks a lot quicker than the police officers did. And it just reminds me of, like, every Criminal Mind episode when the FBI shows up to that small town police precinct and the police chief is just like, "What are you guys doing in our town? We don't need you." Well, there's a guy running around that has killed 15 people and you're sitting in your chair with your dick in your hand while Googling a very specific corn site that your wife probably wouldn't be too happy you're looking at. Isn't that right, Big Chief Daddy 69? How did you know that? We're the FBI, Chief. We're always watching. Anyway, Rossmo developed what is known as geographic profiling, which essentially states that serial killers often start within an area that they know best and slowly over time work their way further and further outside of their comfort area in killing people. He literally built an entire topographical computer program based off of this theory, and it was incredibly helpful worldwide. Like, people were using it everywhere, but the Vancouver Police Department, no! They're too smart. They didn't need him. Nah, we're good. You built that. You spent years developing that and it's worked for everybody else. Nah, we're good. Thanks, Thoy. That's nice to know, but no. And considering that this is exactly how Robert Pickton's case worked, with him working within his area and then working his way out, if they did use Kim's method, they definitely would have caught Robert a lot sooner. So we don't know for sure if this was Robert Pickton's first victim, but it's a very high chance that Wendy Louise Allen was Robert Pickton's first victim, because she was last seen being picked up by Robert on March 30th, 1979, and would never be seen again. And she would be the first of many over the next 20 years. His next victim was Rebecca Guno, who disappeared on June 22nd, 1983, followed by Yvonne Marlene Abagosis on New Year's Day, 1984. So you'll notice how the time periods between murders slowly gets shorter and shorter. He's waiting a long amount of time to start, but then you see how he gets more and more comfortable and sees that the police aren't really caring or not really investigating, so they'll start to become a lot more frequent. And in 2004, a former sex worker reported that she did report a friend that underwent an assault and a disappearance all the way back in 1984 on East Hastings, but it was never investigated. And that's a pattern that'll keep happening as well. A lot of sex workers noticed that their friends were going missing and would report it. The reports would not get investigated. So back on the farm at this time, this started to become a place to hang out for criminals, basically. It became the place to be for lowlifes in Coquitlam. It was a place to drink, to party, and commit crimes. Am I right? Just kidding. And this would be the most ideal crowd to be associated with for Robert Pickton and Dave Pickton, because all of these people didn't give a single what they were doing. To be fair, most of them didn't know what to extent that they were doing these crimes, but still, they didn't care. They just used them for their property, basically, and piggybacked off of them. Am I right? It's a terrible joke. But Dave, Robert's brother, like I said before, was the social one of the two, and he would be the one to socialize with everybody, and everybody would kind of just keep their distance from Robert, because he was widely known as just weird. And he would never let anybody go into his room, which who the fuck would? Basically, Dave was the cool brother and Robert was the really weird brother that it just came along to hang out because your mom said he had to, and people just tolerate him because they had to. Now, despite being a weird, smelly Robert always managed to maintain at least one relationship with a woman at a time, and a non-violent relationship at that. And one of those women was Tanya Carr. She would end up moving in with Robert when he eventually moved into a trailer on the property for 18 months. 18 months this woman endured this man's stench and presence. But during these 18 months, it was said and is kind of widely known that Robert didn't murder anybody during this time, or within about a 3-year, there was about a 3-year gap between him murdering people. So her presence clearly changed something within him. I'm not sure how that works, but unfortunately she would leave, and shortly after that murders would start up again. So from 1992 to 1995, there wasn't any murder happening that we know of. But I think after Tanya left, this might have triggered something within Robert, and shortly after he would take 4 women prostitutes to his farm and they would never be seen again. And the only reason we know that is because of a survivor by the name of Tracy gave testimony about it. Tracy was approached by Robert on East Hastings in 1995 and he was looking for a BJ. Gross. And Tracy said she almost didn't get in the truck because the smell was so rancid. But alas, she did end up getting into the truck, and Robert Pickton would drive the 30 minutes back to his farm, where they went to his trailer, which she said didn't smell much better than his truck. Anyway, something that Tracy did notice was that the trailer was filled with women's clothing and jewelry, which, red flag, number... no. But she ignored that and she went back, did her job, and then when it came time to pay her, Robert would look for his wallet and then accuse Tracy of stealing the money from him. He would then grab a knife and put it up to her face and cut 2 buttons off of her shirt, but she was able to talk him down and he ended up driving her back to East Hastings. But on the drive home, he would brag about how he was a white knight and a savior of prostitutes and would try to give them a second chance by getting them off drugs. And if he didn't get them off drugs, or if they relapsed after he tried to save them, he would murder them. He just blatantly confessed to this woman that he had killed multiple women. And this is something that's very common amongst serial killers, especially ones that go after women of the night, if you will. They have like this white knight savior complex, and then they also have this godlike complex that they can rid people that are less than them from the earth. And Pickton was very much one of these killers. So going back in time a bit, Robert used to have a friend when he was a child named Lisa Wells. And they would eventually grow up, kind of separated and apart, and then Lisa Wells would end up actually having a kid with Dave Pickton, Robert Pickton's brother. And she would end up living on the property and becoming very close with Robert as well, like as friends. And he would kind of listen to whatever Lisa said. Lisa was the only one that could convince him to fucking shower. So they were very close. And she also remained steadfast that she did not know any of the crimes that were happening when they were happening, which, like, come on. She was even quoted as saying,
"You know, I always had it in the back of my mind that Willie was a serial killer. I was never afraid of him myself. I knew he would never hurt me, but everyone else? Well..."
But she says she didn't know that he was doing anything, but she had a really good idea. Hey, maybe listen to your instincts. All right? I don't know. Maybe look around a little bit. I don't know. So this is now around the time where Dave and Robert's parties on the farm were getting bigger and bigger. And they were selling a lot of meat during these parties and finding a lot of success. So they figured, hey, might as well make this into a proper establishment. And that is when the Piggy Palace would become a lucrative business on the property. And it would be at this time where Robert's victim count is now getting into the teens at this point. But this place was legit. They had security, food, bartenders, live music, a dance floor. Like, this place held a lot of people. On a good night, the boys would be bringing in $10,000 to $40,000. Like, this was the place to be. And these Piggy Palace parties weren't only attended by, like, low-life criminals at this point. They were attended by, like, off-duty officers and just regular locals at this point. Like, this was, like, the Piggy Palace was the place to party, you know what I'm saying? So in 1995, a victim of Roberts was found for the very first time out of all of his victims so far. She was unrecognizable and unable to be identified because all that was found was 1/2 of her skull that was cut in half, and this was found in a lagoon of sorts off of the property. So she was considered a Jane Doe. But by the time she was found, it's probable that Robert had killed almost 20 women at this point. And when police would go and investigate this piece of evidence, they would note that the skull was cut in half, and it was cut in half with a saw. And it was assumed that it was done by somebody with a butchering history. Who do the cops know that they are friends with that butcher things on a regular basis? It's right there! It's fine. And they would find a particular substance on the skull that meant that this piece of bone was kept in a freezer for a very long amount of time before it was discarded. And later on, when Robert would eventually be caught, they would find a rib bone on Robert's property that would match the DNA of the skull, so we know it was Robert's victim. And they would find 2 other heads cut in the exact same way as the skull found in the swamp in one of Robert's freezers as well. But those heads were found on the farm in 2002. And the skull from the swamp was dated all the way back to 1994. So that just shows that he was already in this comfortable killing routine for the past 10 years, using the same methods on his most recent victims. And we don't know how this head ended up off of his property, given that it was the only piece of evidence that was ever found off of his property. My guess is that he was probably dropping something off at the rendering plant and found that this head was in there and maybe threw it out the window or something. I'm not sure, and I don't think we'll ever know. And we do know that Robert would never take heads, hands, or feet to the rendering plant because they were too recognizable, and he didn't want to run the risk of people seeing that. So he might have just taken the head by accident. I don't know, like when you forget your keys. I don't know how that works. So by early 1997, Robert's victim count was almost at 30 at this point. And it was at this time the women of the night were getting more and more apprehensive about getting into Robert's vehicle, or anybody's vehicle at that point, especially going to a much further location like Coquitlam, because it was about 30 minutes away. But Robert didn't really have an issue with this because he would just offer them a lot more money than they would sell their services for. And he would also offer them drugs on top of that as well. Because at this point, Robert was a millionaire. Dave and Robert were doing very well with the Piggy Palace, the Meat Locker, the Chop Shop Yard. They were doing very well for themselves, so he was able to throw money at whatever he wanted. And if he ended up murdering somebody, he wouldn't have to pay them at all. But this is one of my favorite parts of this story. So, one night, Sandra Ringwald, a boss-ass queen bitch. She's not a bitch. She's awesome. A working girl from East Hastings got into Robert's truck and took the half-an-hour trip back to his pig farm. Once they entered his trailer, she took notice that a large kitchen knife was just sitting on the kitchen counter. And then she proceeded to go back into Robert's bedroom, which was just a gross mattress on the floor, and she would have intercourse with him. So after her services were complete, Robert would go to pay her, and Sandra would ask to use his phone so she could call her pimp to say that she was done her services and that she was on her way back to East Hastings. And while she was looking at the phone book to look up her pimp's number, she would feel that Robert was approaching her from behind, and before she could do anything, he grabbed her right wrist and slapped on handcuffs. But before he could grab her left wrist, she flung around and went into full bad bitch beast mode and started to beat the shit out of Robert. And while she was doing this, she recalled the knife that was on the kitchen counter, and she would pick it up and start slashing at Robert, slitting his jugular and stabbing him in his face through his cheek, cutting some of his jawbone and breaking out some of his teeth. Fuck yeah, it's fucking metal, dude. And although she got these blows in, Robert was just Frankenstein and just kept coming towards her. So Sandra, realizing she had no other option, she just ran and busted through Robert, busted through the trailer door, and got outside. But Robert would follow quickly behind her and wrestle the knife out of her hand and end up stabbing her twice in the abdomen. Luckily, he was starting to get weak from blood loss, so she was able to wrestle the knife back from him and wrestle off of him and sprint towards the public road while carrying her intestines in her hand. Like, I would have given up. To be honest, I don't know if I have the strength to do, like, this woman is my goddamn hero, all right? So she's running with a knife, carrying her intestines, waving down a car, and this older couple would come and pick her up, and she would be absolutely frantic. And not knowing if she was going to live or die, she would point back at the farm and say, "If I die, that man killed me." This couple would take her to the hospital, and police would show up as well. She would tell them the story, and they would go back to Robert's farm. And this is a happy ending, right? Oh my gosh, they're gonna catch him because he did all this bad stuff. No, of course not. Of course not. The police would go to Robert's farm and see him dying in a pool of his own blood and take him to the hospital, but unfortunately Robert was able to easily talk his way out of the situation and just say that Sandra held him at knife point because she was robbing him and it was just in self-defense. But the police would actually do something and charge him for attempted murder, but when the day of court came, Sandra didn't show up to testify because she was absolutely petrified of what Robert and Dave, his brother, might do to her if she didn't win the trial, if it didn't go her way. So Robert got off scot-free and would continue to kill for 4 more years. But at this time, word had spread about what Robert had done. So you'd assume every working girl would be wary of giving Robert any business. But it was at this time also that he would hire on a con artist prostitute by the name of Gina Houston that would aid in the flow of non-stop working women doing services for Robert and getting murdered. So they met in 1993 and they quickly became partners. Robert would pay her rent and give her extra cash, and Gina would promise the prostitutes that she knows this man with a ton of money, a ton of drugs, and a good time. And usually about 50% of the time they would agree to go. And of course, when it came to testifying, Gina denied that she ever knew that Robert was killing any of the women, even though she was said to have known over 30 of the women that were never seen again. So she's just like,
No, I mean, I knew them. I knew them intimately, and I saw them all the time, and then I never saw them after I was with Robert, but I mean, who's to say? You know?
You're a piece of shit, Gina. So in 1997, Robert would kill the most women he would ever kill in a single year. And that number was 14 women in 1 year that we know of. And the police a year later in 1998 would say, quote unquote, "There is no indication of a serial killer here." What? So there's over 30 women that have disappeared from the exact same place, and these police are still in denial of that. Like, or they just don't care. And that is my personal opinion, is that some of the police officers, the higher-ups, just definitely didn't care or prioritize sex workers, and it's disgusting. Now, by 1988, there was a $100,000 reward from America's Most Wanted. Not even the police, but a TV show took notice of the whole situation that was going on and even did an expose on it and offered $100,000 Canadian to anybody that could come forward with information about this case. And at this time, there were definitely a few people that could have come forward and completely blown this case wide open. And one of them was Robert's friend, Andy Williams. Andy Williams had been one of Robert's friends for a while and also lived on the property. A lot of Robert's friends lived on the property. It was really big, but you'll find that a lot of these people that were associated with him at some point lived on the property. And for some reason, Robert loved to share all of his secrets with Andy Williams. So one night in 1999, Robert asked Andy if he wanted to go get some from East Hastings, which, like, as your buddy does, you know? And this is the night that Robert would open up and tell Andy what he really liked to do with the prostitutes. And Robert would show him. So Andy would say that Robert would lift up his mattress and show him the tools that he used to kill these women. He would show Andy a pair of handcuffs, a belt, and a piece of piano wire with 2 handles on each side. And then he told him he would pick up the women from the east side and bring them back to his trailer, have sex with them from behind, and as he was about to finish, he would slowly grab their arms and take them from behind and handcuff them and then proceed to strangle them to death. Then he told them after they were dead, he would take them back to the barn, hang them up by hooking through their ankles, bleed them, gut them, and then dismember them and feed them to his pigs and take the rest to the rendering plant. And after telling Andy this, it absolutely freaked him the out, and he skipped town. He left. No shit. Robert, a few days later, realizing he screwed up by telling Andy this, tracked down Andy and beat the absolute living fuck out of him within an inch of his life, and scared Andy so much that he never went to the cops until later on when Robert was already caught. And another person that witnessed Robert's atrocities was Lynn Ellingson, a friend of Robert and Dave's that also lived on the property. So one night, Robert and Lynn would go out and buy some crack, as you do with your friends, you know? And they would also go to East Hastings and pick up one of the women of the night to take back and party with and smoke crack with, as you do. So they would go back to the trailer, all smoke crack together, and then Robert would eventually take the woman that they got from East Hastings back to his bedroom and have sex with her. And while they were doing that, Lynn just went and smoked some more crack, as you do. And then when she came back to see where they were, she couldn't find them. So she was looking around the property for Robert and would come across the barn and see the light on. So she would walk in and see women's legs hanging from the barn ceiling. Naturally, she screamed, and Robert would come up to her, grab her arm, take her to the table where he was dismembering the woman, and make her stand there and watch as he finished. And all Lynn said was that she kept her head down, and all she could see was organs and body parts being thrown into a bucket on the ground, and a big clump of hair in the middle of the table. And by that testimony, we know that Robert was scalping his victims before dismembering them, so the hair wouldn't get caught in his saw. All of this makes me nauseous. I've read so much about all of this, and I couldn't eat. It's just so heartbreaking. I can't even express it. I'm so sorry to the victims and their families. Just want to keep reiterating that. And Robert, you're a piece of shit, and I hope that you die a violent death. Is that too much? Nah. But anyway, this is just screaming Texas Chainsaw Massacre! I'm just thinking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, man. But after this incident, Robert gave Lynn a ton of money for booze and drugs, and Lynn would stay drunk and high for weeks after this, which naturally, I can't even imagine witnessing that. And she was scared out of her mind. So she did not go to the police either until after Robert was already caught. But either way, somehow, these stories did make it back to the cops, because Andy and Lynn told other people about these stories, and they would make it back to the cops, but it would still be another 2 years before Robert Pickton was charged with any of the crimes. They just completely disregarded these stories as rumors. So by the year 2000, Robert had replaced his con artist Gina with an even worse and more evil accomplice, Dina Taylor, a terrifying woman to say the least. She, like Robert, hated women of the night and was happy to get them off the streets in any way she could, even if it meant sending them to their inevitable demise at the Piggy Palace. She would end up using the same method as Gina, telling the women that this man had a ton of money, drugs, and a good time, but she would say that it was her uncle, so it'd be even more trustworthy, essentially. And when Robert was caught a few years later after this, Dina's DNA would be found on over 113 items on the property and crime scene. I don't know if she was fucking sliding through these fucking pig pens, but she was not innocent in any way, and there was zero repercussions for her. So in March of 2001, Robert would take another 3 victims, and some people in the VPD were finally starting to take notice and see the pattern that was happening. It only took you fucking 20 fucking years. But despite having blatant stories from people backing up the fact that Robert has murdered dozens of women, that still wouldn't be the reason why they would go to the property and search it. It basically happened on accident, and this is how it happened. See, Robert Pickton had another friend named Scotty Chubb. Yes, Chubb. Anyway, living on the property as well with his wife, Tasha. And one night they got into a domestic dispute, and the cops were called, and a rookie cop was sent to the scene. And Scotty would tell the rookie that he got upset because his wife was doing and he didn't want her to be doing, and the rookie cop was actually in the drug division, so he asked Scotty if he knew who the dealer was, and Scotty said he didn't, but the rookie cop would give him his number and say, well, if you know anything further about who's dealing these drugs, just give me a call. So this guy went to a domestic dispute and then just asked this criminal woman abuser if he could help him with his own job, basically. Anyway, luckily, Scotty Chubb would start to run out of money because he was unemployed and he needed some rent money. So he figured he could be a little bit of a snitch and call this rookie cop back and maybe make a few bucks. And who did he have to rat out on? This guy he knew with illegal firearms in his trailer on the pig farm. And who is that? Robert Pickton. So the police finally got a search warrant for Robert's farm, all because of his shitty friend that ratted him out for rent money, which is kind of hilarious, but just f***ing crazy. You know, all this evidence, all the signs, everything, and then it just takes this one f***ing idiot to do this. I mean, I'm glad it did happen, but it's just insane to me. Selena would never, you know? So on February 6, 2002, the police would go to Robert's farm, would bust down his trailer door and find one illegal firearm, and they would arrest him on the spot. And as they searched the trailer more, they would find a box full of knives and a piece of paper on the floor with a name on it, Heather Bottomley, which was a woman that went missing back in 2001, but that wasn't enough evidence to charge him of anything, so they kept looking. Under a pile of clothes in the trailer, they would find one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence I've ever heard of, and it was a .22 revolver with a curved dildo pulled over the barrel. Like, what? I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know. And they would also find an inhaler in Robert's office with one of the victims' names on it, Serena Abbotsway. And she was last seen on August 1st the year before. Although this still wasn't enough to place charges, it was enough for police to get a property-wide search warrant. So next, they would go to the slaughterhouse, where they would find pig corpses hanging from the ceiling and women's clothes, jewelry, and sex toys strewn about. But they still hadn't found a body or any body parts yet. So as the forensic team took to Robert's farm, Robert had got out on bail, and they had sent an officer to speak with him and tried to get a confession out of him. And it did not take long at all for this to hit the media. Like, as soon as the cops were searching the property, this was just, it went gangbusters all over the media, and I remember it.
Good evening. There are growing calls tonight for a public inquiry into the Robert Pickton case as more details emerge.
Pickton was charged and convicted of killing 6 women. Trade workers connected to Vancouver's downtown east side. Other gruesome details revealed DNA of the murdered women found in processed meat on his farm.
Like, there was just so many people speculating about this case, and there were so many people that were scared as well. So 10 whole days later, after searching the property, the police would finally found an orange cushion and a mangled metal mesh shower hose, both stained with blood. And with this DNA found, the police would finally have a match to one of the victims, Mona Wilson, Robert's last victim, and this would be enough to put him under arrest. So although Robert was arrested, they still needed to figure out where the other 48 women were. So while teams searched his property, the police would absolutely grill Robert for a confession on a daily basis, and they would also put a cell plant into his cell to try to coerce a confession as well. And you know Robert, he loves telling secrets, doesn't he? So after warming up to his cell plant, he did open up a little bit and basically just said how he loved being famous and being in the media. He said to him, quote unquote,
The whole fucking world knows me. All the way to Hong Kong to everywhere.
a very well-spoken scholar. He wasn't that smart.
Another phrase is, officers, but you got other stuff on me. No shit. That's why it's part of it.
And his voice was also just awful. It was so awful. You couldn't even understand him half the time. The cell plant at this point would not obtain a confession, so the cops continued to hound him in the investigation room for weeks. But Robert would not budge. Even when they said how his own friends had told the cops that he was murdering women, he would literally just say, "Oh, they're out to lunch. They're just out to lunch." If you don't know what that means, that's a very common Canadian saying, which means like, "Oh, they're crazy. They don't even know what they're talking about. Oh, like, get out of here. Get out of town." But it's just so dumb. Anyway, but after weeks of hounding Robert, one of the cops would say something that would crack him. And it would be simply this.
Willie, you didn't do a good job of cleaning up those girls' blood. You've got to agree with me.
And Robert would respond,
You're the serious stuff with the anchors. You check yourself. You're getting better than 10 minutes. I buried my own people grief. He's like,
like, what? That's what he just kept saying, is that he was sloppy and that he didn't clean up right. And although that's all he said to the cops, once Robert went back into his cell with the plant, Robert could not contain his excitement and secrets anymore and would end up sharing everything with the cell plant. By the end of the night, Robert confessed to killing 49 women, adding that he almost made it to the big 5-0. That was something he kept saying, that he wished he could have made it to 50.
Big 5.
So while the confession was happening, the cops were continuing to search Robert's property and Robert's workshops as well. And they would find 2 5-gallon plastic buckets in one of his meat locker freezers. And they didn't see it at first because it had a massive film of freezer burn ice. So they would wipe it down and see the horror that lied within these buckets. And they would find in one bucket, there was one head sliced in half, 2 hands put in one side of the skull and 2 feet put in the other side of the skull. And the other bucket would contain the exact same thing, just of a different woman. And the cops would find even more body parts in the piggery. A sewage company would need to pump the piggery for 4 straight days before it was empty, because Robert never cleaned it or emptied it in 20 years. So it was a lot of pig shit. And after it was all pumped out, the forensics team would have to sift through all of it by hand. By hand. Oh my God. There were over 100 people working there day and night for years, sifting through Robert's property piece by piece. And they would find thousands of fragments of not only animal parts, but also human remains. But one mystery in this case is that they would never find any leg bones or arm bones. Out of all of the thousands of pieces of evidence they found, they never found, and they never knew where those ended up. And on July 15th, 2002, 2 officers were searching through 2 of his other freezers, and they found 3 plastic bags full of ground meat. They were originally put into storage for 4 months by the cops, assuming it was just pig meat, but they would test it and find that it was made of 2 types of meat: pork and human flesh. And this ground meat would match 2 of Robert's victims. And with the amount of ground meat that Robert would sell and give away, it kind of goes without question that there was human remains in this meat. But despite this incredible obvious evidence and the circumstances in which it was, there was no official recall or announcement to the public about this. It's just another giant W for the police. I'm just kidding. It was a fucking massive. Like, knowing this now and like I remember hearing about this later on, like everybody, it's just so disheartening and sickening. And like to think that parts of people are in products or meat, it's like you can't even wrap your head around it. Like I can't, it's hard to even think about. And I'm just so incredibly sorry to all the families. Now, when the preliminary trial happened, Robert was charged with 27 counts of first-degree murder, each of those counts having human DNA attached to them. So, like, without a doubt, he was guilty of them, essentially. But the judge for Robert's case was either grossly incompetent, hiding something, or just had a hatred for sex workers, because this entire trial should have been a slam dunk, wham bam, thank you ma'am. But this judge would straight up say charging Robert with 27 murders would take too long. And one of the murders he just completely dismissed, the one that we talked about in the very beginning that was a Jane Doe, because she was never identified, so she didn't count to the judge, which is fucking disgusting. So he took the now 26 murder charges down to only 6, with the promise that the other 20 would be charged against Robert later on. And the issue with this is that the prosecution team was not able to use any of the evidence in the other 20 cases in the 6 women trial. So they weren't able to relay information from those cases or make connections, which completely took away from the case, which obviously affected the jury and their final decision. And the judge also said that Sandra, the badass bitch that carried her intestines and a knife and got away from that piece of shit Robert Pickton, wasn't able to stand trial because she wasn't one of the victims technically. So she wasn't able to stand trial because she didn't fucking die. Which I reading this is, it's just, I can't even wrap my head around it. Like this whole case is just infuriating. And I mean, the Canadian judicial system is already flawed in many ways, as are many other judicial systems, but this case is just, it highlights it so much. Anyway, I digress. So the defense was able to convince the jury enough that maybe Robert wasn't fully culpable of committing these murders. And he was found guilty of only 6 counts of second-degree murder, instead of the 27 murder charges in the first degree he was first charged with. And after the trial, the forensics team would find enough evidence to put Robert's murder count to 33 women. But in 2010, the Canadian Supreme Court ruled that there would be no further trial for Robert Pickton. So Robert Pickton was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, but now these families go without justice for their family members that underwent the most horrific end-of-life experiences. Like, I wish that these families got justice and that these victims got justice for themselves, but they didn't because the system failed them, and it's just heartbreaking. I'm glad this monster is in jail and will never see the light of day again, and I hope that he's getting beat the shit out of, and I hope that he's thinking about his eternal flame at all times, but it's still incredibly sad that it ended this way. But that concludes this video and the story of Robert Pickton. Thank you for hanging around for as long as you did. I know this was a longer one, but this case was definitely a tough one to get through given that it was so close to home. But like I said before, I really enjoy doing these deep dives. If you guys want me to continue doing them, give me some suggestions down below. And make sure to like the video if you like the video. Also subscribe if you want to subscribe. This is obviously the best YouTube channel ever. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!